Hey folks, Colin here from Something's Recording, and today I'm going to show you my strategy for mixing faster and more efficiently. I'm going to be breaking down my workflow for you today, but before we dive in, if you're ready to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process as a whole and really start to hone your workflow, then I have just the thing for you. It is my 7-step mixing checklist. It's a simple PDF that will guide you through the entire mixing process, step by step, to get you professional and radio-ready mixes without the hassle and without the guesswork. It is completely free, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's check out my mixing workflow and my strategy. Now this is the workflow, this is the strategy that works best for me. I found the more I fell into this, the more I worked this way, the faster I got, the more efficient I got, and the more consistent my mixes came out. The easier it is for you to get through a mix, and the faster you can get through it, the more consistent your mixes are going to come out. If you're doing the same things, if you know what you're going to do, if you know where you're going next, if you know where you're going from, things are going to come easier, you're going to mix faster, and you're going to get more consistent mixes across the board. Now for me, I always start my mixes by getting my Mix Bus processing in place. We've talked about these plugins before. It's my console shaper, my fat channel with my SSL bus compressor on, and my tape machine. And I always have my limiter in place as well at the end of my mix bus chain. That way I'm mixing through a limiter. It's just boosting the volume of my entire mix by 6 dB. Now usually when I'm mixing, I pull my master fader down by about 6 dB. That way I get the benefit of the limiter on top, but I'm not blowing the volume out on my headphones or on my speakers here. Next thing I usually do is I start getting my level balances. Now I start with the drums. So I pull up my kick drum, I get a good kick drum sound, pull up my snare drum sound, get a good snare drum sound with the kick drum, and I add things piece by piece. So let's walk through our drums here, and we'll kind of start bare bones, and we'll add each thing in piece by piece here, okay? So there's our kick drum. Now that I've got a good kick drum sound, I've got it balanced. Usually I like my kick drum sitting somewhere here around the -12 part on the meter. That's a good place for me, that I know where the low end should be sitting and where the top end punch or the click should be sitting for the kick drum. Let's add in our snare drum now. So once I get a good snare drum sound, I can level balance it with my kick drum. I like my kick drum and my snare drum to be sitting at about the same level. That way I can make sure there's enough power in each drum that it doesn't feel empty without the other one, right? You want this, I like the same amount of power from my kick drum and my snare drum because they're really what's driving the mix. They're the driving forces in the drum part for this piece here. Next, I like to add in my toms. And I usually mix my toms together. Sometimes I'll bust them together. I'm not here, but let's take a look at this tom roll. We'll do a before and after here. So you can see we're stripping away a lot of the mid-range here on our toms. And getting them a little bit of low end and making sure there's enough snap up top that they sit with the snare drum. Let's add in our overheads here. So I like to get my spot mics in and then pull my overheads up and bring in the balance of the cymbals and the hi-hat and a little bit of full kit balance from being overhead the kit like that. So now we've got our dry kit. That's where I start. I get my dry kick good, and then I bring in my Bricasti reverb, excuse me. Or if there are room mics, I pull up the room mics. Here is where my mixing workflow starts to kick in, right? Usually when I pull up the Bricasti close to begin with, it's usually a little bit lower because reverb is going to sound a lot bigger by itself. The more instruments you add in, the more they absorb that reverb and the higher you have to push it. So here's where I ended up at the end of the mix, but we're going to add this in. I want you to see what this adds to our drum sound. You can hear in the reverb we have the same amount of power coming from our kick and snare. That's because the way we're working here, we started with our kick, then we worked on our snare, and we got them working together. So when we send them to the reverb, we get the same amount of energy coming from each from the reverb. Next thing I like to add in here, we'll kind of mute everything as we go along in. So we've got our drums in. Next thing I add in is my bass guitar. So I have a bass DI and a bass amp. These are the same, just split apart. Frequency-wise, I've showed you this technique before, isolating the low end on our bass DI. So now we'll kick in our bass sound. I like to pull in the bass sound and get it level balanced with the kick drum to get them working together in the low end here. So now we've got a good, strong foundation built for our mix. That's why I start with the drums and then bring in the bass, because I like to build a good, strong foundation rhythm-wise and low-end-wise before we add in any other instruments. Now, the next instrument I like to add in is I like to get my lead vocal at least in so it has its spot in the center of the mix. So we'll add in our lead vocal here before we move into any of the instruments. Now, if your instrument is more prominent than your lead vocal, get your instrument in first and then add your vocals. You want to add what's your focal point of the mix before you add what surrounds it. So let's throw our vocal in here and get our vocal sitting right.
Any time of day, see the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load. Look through any window, yeah. Any time of day, see the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load. Look through.
The reference point for me, volume-wise for the lead vocal, is I like it sitting close in range with the snare drum. That way when the snare drum hits, it's given a little bit of support and a little bit of snap to our vocal sound. If my lead vocal and my snare drum are sitting somewhere in the same realm, I know things are working nice, and I know when I pull up the rest of the instruments, it's going to surround everything quite nicely. It's going to bake everything in. So now we've got our foundation built, we've got our focal point in. Let's surround that focal point. Let's bring in our rhythm guitars here.
Look through any window, yeah. Any time of day, see the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load. Look through any window, yeah. Any time of day, see the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load. Look through any.
So if you don't get your focal point in before you bring in your rhythm instruments like your guitars or your keys, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get them in the right spot and then bring in your vocal. Because you don't know where your focal point's sitting and you don't know the level you need on the side to surround them and to sit or balance well with the lead vocal or with your focal point. That's why I get my foundation built first, then bring in the lead vocal or our focal point there, and then surround it with our rhythm guitars or our rhythm instruments. So whether it's keyboards, guitars, what have you. It's a little bit easier to get the balance going. You could probably pull them up and get them balanced with the bass guitar, but you don't know how well that's going to sit with your vocal. That's why I get my vocal in first, then bring in the guitars. And if need be, you can go back and tweak your vocal, right? If it needs to be a little bit louder, or if it needs a little bit more mid-range punch to cut through the guitars, what have you. Always go back and tweak as you add instruments in. So get your drums going, get your bass going, Tweak your drums if you need to, get them to sit right together. Add in your vocal, get your vocal good, tweak your drums and bass to make sure they sit with the vocal, add your guitars, tweak your vocal. So always going back. Let's get in our lead guitar here now. So this is our other point that's going to sit with our vocal. You'll notice it ducks down here while our vocal's going. That's something we added in to make sure it sits with our vocal. So let's add in our lead guitar.
Look through any window, yeah, any time of day. See the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load. Look through any window, yeah, any time of day. See the
So now we've got our lead elements going, right? We got our lead guitar and we got our lead vocal in. Final thing I like to add is the background vocals. If they're wide, still adding them last. If they're up the middle, if they're harmonies like this, still adding them last to support our lead vocal. So I usually like to get the harmonies going good by themselves before I tuck them under the vocal, and I can tweak from there. So here's our harmonies.
Look through any window, yeah, any time of day. See the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load. Where do they look through any window, yeah?
So once I get a good balance on the harmonies, I throw them in with the lead vocal and get another balance.
Look through any window, yeah, any time of day. See the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load. Where do they look through any window, yeah, any time of day?
So now I've got all the vocals balanced together. Now I can tuck it in the entire mix here.
Look through any window, yeah, any time of day. See the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load. Where do they look through any window, yeah, any time of day. See the drivers on the road, running down the heavy load. Where do they look through any window, yeah?
Now once I get to this point, this is where I would be adding in effects, right? So the slap delay and the plate reverb on the vocals I would throw in. So I got them on the lead vocal as well as the harmonies. And then I would throw in any kind of reverb I need on the snare drum. I always have my room mic in. That's already in there. But if I need any extra room noise on the snare or the toms, I would throw that in. If I needed any effects on the lead guitar, that's where I would pull those up. So effects I would put in last, and then do one last round on everything, right? Make sure everything's sitting well together. If I want to check it in mono, if I want to check it at a lower volume, I can check the whole mix together at this point. That is my workflow, starting with the drums, starting with my mix bus processing, then bringing up the drums, then the bass, then the lead vocal, then your rhythm elements, so your rhythm guitars, keyboards, that kind of thing. Then lead instruments, lead guitars, lead vocals, or not lead vocals, lead guitars, lead synth lines, that kind of stuff. Then background vocals, any kind of things that sit in the background, any kind of pad elements would pull in there. Then effects, reverb, delays, slap delays, that kind of stuff I pull in last. I hope that was helpful for you. Like I said, if you're ready to take your mixes to the next level and really start dialing in your workflow as an engineer, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my 7-step mixing checklist, and you can download it below to start creating more professional mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.